All right, welcome everybody to our next installation of MTR Connect. My name's Brian Nitzel, and it's a pleasure to have you here. Um, I would imagine that the majority of you came here not for me, but for my two guests, which is the way it should be. So in case you don't know anything about me and making things right, I thought I would kind of just give you the context of my organization. So making things right. The mission is to help folks rethink the Christian response and responsibility to LGBTQ plus people, and especially those who have experienced harm from the church. There was a landmark study back in 2016 that a lot of us in this work reference that found that 86% of LGBTQ plus people were raised in the church. And of those, 86%, over half, 54%, left the church at the age of consent, around the age of 18. And the number one stated reason was negative, harmful experiences. And I think that is what the Christian conversation should be about. And I think that's what we can help make right. So that's what making things right is simply about. And it's wonderful because we can do that amidst theological differences. This is common ground work that we all care about. MTR Connect is it is what it is. It's Zoom meetups. Started early on where people were curious. So we just gathered curious Christians to lean in on this stuff together. The goal is real simple, just to learn from each other and to encourage and equip you in whatever situation you're in with your family and your church and your community. So if you want to learn more about making things right and the various resources and ministry partners that we work with, you can check that out at makingthingsright.org. All right, so there's MTR commercial. Plan for the night. I'm going to give you a few updates on my organization. Then I'm going to set up the conversation with my two wonderful friends and guests tonight. Somewhere towards the end of the call, we'll pivot into a little Q&A, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then right about 8:45 Eastern time, or about an hour and 10 minutes from now, wherever you are, we'll wrap up the call. And about questions, if you're not Zoom savvy, it's okay. Well, you clearly are Zoom savvy. You're on the call. You got here. But if you're not, there's a chat feature at the bottom of your window, and you can click on it. It opens up a little chat window. And if you have questions along the way that you want to submit, feel free. We have some pre-submitted questions as well, but that's the best place for you to go to put in some questions, and we'll do our best to get to them at the end. We never get to all of them, but Kelly will try to help me curate some out that we think will serve the audience well. So that's questions. And one final housekeeping item is respect. I am fully confident that 100% of you are here with the best of intentions, but this is spicy subjects. So sometimes people don't have the best of intentions. So just so you know, my partner in crime, Kelly, will be watching the chat, and she'll be watching the screens to ensure that we're only having productive, collaborative things going on in there. And we'll reserve the right to remove folks as needed. So I only say that to you for the rest and the most of all of you who are here for productive reasons. All right, so that's it for housekeeping. A couple updates on making things right. I have some exciting news, at least for me. I'm working on a book, and I've thought about that for a couple of years, and I started to get pretty serious about it a few months ago. And just this week, I hired an agent who is going to represent me to publishers and stuff. And so it's always been a dream of mine to take kind of the best of the stories and the findings of this project that we launched a few years ago to, invite folks to sort of rethink what it means to love our LGBTQ plus neighbor. And so I'm going to attempt to go after doing that in a book, and it's an extremely long process. And we have to make our case to publishers and all of that stuff, but it's a fun new chapter for me. And so I'll keep you posted on that. And then also this MTR Connect season, which you may just know about this episode, but just so you know, we have a season all the way through October. I think we have how many more, Kelly? 3 more episodes. So just to tease you on that a little bit, this month we dedicated to the Christian response to transgender people and really up our empathy and our awareness and our advocacy. So tonight is about that. 2 weeks from now, Mark Wingfield will be joining us, really more from the allies perspective. And he just has this wonderful story. He would call himself the most unsuspecting spokesperson for transgender people, and he just brings really wonderful, hard-earned perspectives and advice to us of how to love transgender people well. So that'll be in 2 weeks. And then a little preview in September. It's 10 years since Exodus shut down. If you don't know what Exodus is, that was the previous international ex-gay global ministry. And the executive director at the time shut it down, giving a long-ranging or wide apology to the LGBTQ plus community for the harm done. And we're going to have Alan Chambers come to our call to just really discuss 10 years later, what does the landscape of reparative therapy look like? And it's an important part of the history of our community from an empathy standpoint. We're also going to have Candace Zubernat join us, who really brings that. She runs the Christian Closet, which is a really trusted counseling service for LGBTQ plus folks. So with the history of Exodus and the counseling perspective, we're going to talk about folks that came out of the ex-gay movement and to up our empathy there. And then in the month of October, we're going to talk about all the sides: side A, side B, side X, side Y. What the heck are they? And more importantly, how do we not take sides with each other in relationships and ministry? And it's really hard to get people in the room that can have different theological perspectives, yet really know how to collaborate. And we're going to have two shining examples of that, representing two different theological perspectives. Justin Lee and Gregory Coles will be at that call in October. So pretty likely when you get a follow-up email from here, I'll remind you about all of those events. But feel free to check them out at makingthingsright.org/events for the rest of the season. All right, so let's set up the conversation for tonight, if I may. These days, there is not many bigger hot buttons than all things transgender, as we all know. Why? Why is that? Is it an aversion to something that seems as foundational as our gender? Is it a lack of information or an abundance of misinformation? Is it a lack of proximity and relationship? There was a study done by Pew Research in 2022 that shared findings on all the prevailing opinions on transgender people. For example, whether gender is determined at birth, or what they think about the levels of societal acceptance or lack thereof, and views on policies. Yet the statistics that I really found the most compelling were around relationship. They found that among US adults, 44% know a trans person, and 27% have a trans friend. And among those with religious affiliations, as you might imagine, those numbers are quite lower, which begs the somewhat rhetorical question: how can we as Christians have well-informed opinions without relationship? And so that's what tonight is about. And thank goodness I have two wonderful friends that have upped my ignorance in this department and really been very inspiring. My first friend that I would love to introduce is Grace Thomas. Grace, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Brian.
I was trying to think, and I'll stop talking in a second, but I was trying to think of where we met and what impacted me the most. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we met 2 years ago at the Oriented to Love
That's correct.
retreat.
Yes.
Is that right? Where
yes,
we got
in Philadelphia.
yeah, with probably 17 people in the room or so, and we all had different theological persuasions and orientations and all of that stuff, and we all got in a circle. And I just remember being so impacted by your the beauty of your story. I mean, I could pick out 6 different things, but it was just such a wonderful, eye-opening thing to meet you. And it's been wonderful to stay friends with you. And we would love you to share part of your story with us tonight.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. It was really a joy being with you in that experience as well. It was one of the highlights of my life. I walked away from that experience just treasuring community and connection. And it's been something I've been giving myself to ever since.
Yeah.
I'll tell a little bit about myself. I was a pastor for 32 years in a conservative evangelical denomination. I have 3 children, and my two youngest are both gay. So I have been a parent of queer kids, and then at age 61, I admitted to myself that I am trans and began this journey publicly just about 3 years ago, October. And I want
Wow.
to share a couple of stories tonight. And I want to preface that by saying that these are just stories about my experiences and things that I've learned as a transgender person, I think might bring some insight into some general experiences. But if you're talking to any particular trans person, you'll discover that everybody has a unique story. So I'm not in any way saying that these experiences represent the norm. I'm simply wanting to kind of give some flavor to what it's like and what it's been like for me in particular to be trans. So I want to start out with, in a sense, my coming out story as Grace, the very first time that I ever showed up in the world as Grace. And this was at the Reformation Project conference in Phoenix, Arizona in 2021.
That's right.
I need to give some background to that. I need to say a little bit about my daughter. My daughter is an amazing person who, if you were to get in a room with her, you would be best friends before you left. And you would know the entire time you're with her that you are the most important person in the world to her. She has this uncanny ability to build connection and friendships with just about anyone,
Hmm.
anywhere. And her mother and I have both looked at her repeatedly and said, "Where did you come from?" Because neither one of us have had any of that kind of inclination. Before I showed up at the Reformation Project, I had, I'm not kidding, zero friends. I
Hmm.
was not a person who was very social. Despite being a pastor, I was an introvert, and people drained me. I spent my whole life kind of living that way. I went to many conferences as a pastor, and I came away from those conferences with exactly zero contacts
Hmm.
because I would just go sit by myself at a table, hope that someone would come and sit by me and have conversation. And most of the time it didn't happen.
Hmm.
So that was my MO. I was determined going into that Reformation Project conference that that was not going to be my experience, that
Hmm.
I was not going to eat alone, that I was not going to hide out in my room, that I was not going to go to the farthest table where nobody was sitting at and wait for someone to come sit by me. I was going to figure out a way to be with people because I absolutely knew that I needed connection. So one other kind of piece to the story, I am I did meet Randy and Myra Robertson, another trans couple, and I was desperately wanting to try to figure out how to make my own marriage work. Yesterday was actually, I will put it this way, would have been our 48th wedding anniversary. I'll
Hmm.
give a little more context to that maybe in a bit. So at that time, I was desperately trying to figure out a way, how do we do this? Randy and Myra are still together. And so we had lots of conversation that weekend about how their marriage was working.
Hmm.
One of the things in that conversation that wasn't specifically about marriage was this question that I asked Randy about, how often do people notice that you're trans? And she says, well, most of the time people don't notice right away. But there are two groups of people that do seem to. One of them is preteen girls, and the other one is older women.
Huh.
And it's like one of those little tidbits of information that you file away and see if it'll ever come into use at some point. So that's the context behind this conference. I get there, I go into my room, I change my clothes, I walk out the door for the first time as Grace, and I spend the next 2 or 3 days just being in the world as Grace. And it's difficult to put into words how deeply calming, how much at home I felt in my body and just interacting with people in ways that I had never experienced before in my life, despite the fact that in many ways I was terrified. I remember trying to put on a pair of clip-on earrings the first morning I was going to go to a session. I got up 2 hours early to make sure I was ready, and I was still 15 minutes late because those doggone earrings, I couldn't get them on. But I'm out there. I am I'm interacting with people. I exchanged contact information with 9 people at that conference, most of whom I remain in contact with today. One of those individuals I met because I was standing in the courtyard, determined that I was not going to eat a lunch alone. I had asked 5 or 6 different people, and they'd all had plans. And the place is thinning out, and I'm thinking, any minute now I'm going to go in at the front desk and see if anybody wants to go to lunch with me. But I'm standing there and up comes this woman who grabs me by the elbow, spins me around, and says, "You're coming to lunch with me." And I said, "Absolutely, I am." And that began an incredible friendship that continues to this day. Some of you will know this woman. Her name is Linda Robertson. Um, she has a long history of befriending people, and I was one of those people. All right, so that's setting up. I get to the end of the conference. I am feeling so at home and so at peace and so joyous in being in the world as grace that I decide to do what I've come to call, or what I came to call at that time, being grace in the wild. I decided to go home as grace. That wasn't originally my plan. I was going to go back in the hotel room, change out of my clothes, go back in my male persona, and go back to that life. And I decided I want to see, this feels so incredibly amazing. I want to see what it's like just to be out and about in a place that isn't necessarily safe. It's not surrounded by all of these people who already are leaning toward accepting and embracing and encouraging me. What's it going to be like in the real world, in the wild? And so I get to the airport. And I spend the night at the airport, and it's about 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm standing in line behind this older woman. Remember that story?
Yes, yes.
Her husband comes running in from outside, takes one look at me and says, "Can you help my wife get through the check-in process and get to the gate, make sure she gets on the flight okay? I can't stay, and I would just wondered if you could help her." And I'm sitting here thinking, older woman, how is this going to go? And then I thought about what Linda had done for me on Saturday afternoon, coming up to me and expressing the sort of bold love. And I thought, I would like to offer that same sort of thing to this woman. And I don't know how this is going to turn out. I don't know what she's going to think. I don't know what she's going to know, but I want to offer this to her. So we ended up having this 45, 50-minute long conversation as we made our way to the gate, sat there. She was one of the first on the plane because she had some physical challenges that she was dealing with. And whether or not she knew I was trans, I have no idea. She never said anything. She never gave any indication whether she had that recognition or not. All I know is we had the most lovely conversation that we both really enjoyed. So we get to our destination, and I get off the plane. I get off fairly early, and I'm about to leave, and this thought hits me. What if she needs help on this end? I'm going to wait. I'm going to see whether or not she can use some help. And so it was probably 20, 25 minutes before she got off the plane. Again, she had some physical challenges, so she was one of the last persons off the plane. And I'll never forget what happened when she saw me standing there and realized that I was waiting for her. Her face just lit up with this smile that said, "I can't believe you did this. I can't believe you waited for me." We went over, we embraced. And the thought that crossed my mind in that moment was, oh, this is where my daughter gets this. This is what she experiences all the time. These moments of connection when you give yourself to people and they really feel it. And I was feeling it too. What I realized in that moment is that our daughter came from us, came from me. And in my living out my life as a male and not really knowing how to live that life, not fitting in male culture and not having access to female culture because I was a man, ended up living my whole life in kind of isolation, other than my family and the occasional friend that I would make along the way. And now I discover, wow, when I allow myself to lean into the person that I am when there aren't any restrictions, what a different person I am.
Hmm.
And I think those of you who have come to know me over the course of time have discovered that I love being with people. I love connecting. I would love hearing any of your stories tonight. I could sit with you for an hour or two, whatever it might take, and I would walk away from that experience feeling so energized, because honestly, people are amazing and their stories are incredible. And that's what I've been able to experience since leaning into my identity as Grace. So that story I wanted to share, because so often there's this, I don't know, there's this feeling like there's just this sort of a selfish pursuit of, oh, I need to do my own thing. I feel like that this was being trans and acknowledging that and trying to lean into it has been the greatest gift that I've ever received. And it's helped me to discover things about myself that I could have never discovered any other way.
Hmm.
I also want to mention that this thriving has been extremely costly. I mentioned that I would have celebrated 48 years of marriage yesterday. And right now, my wife and I are separated, and we're trying to figure out what the future looks like for us. We tried for 7 years to do all kinds of different things to make our marriage work, and we weren't able to find a way forward. And so this is where we are right now. And we both love each other. Neither of us like that we're apart. But my wife is a cisgender heterosexual woman who married a man, and she does not want to be married to a woman. I think many of you could understand that, and I understand that. And so we're trying to figure that out as we go on. Brian, I don't know what time we got started, so I don't know what time I have left. I have two
You're
other stories, but we
you're
can.
you're doing fabulous. You're doing great. Thank you. And I
All right.
love, and I won't, don't lose your train of thought, but what I loved about that airplane story, I mean, other than all of it, is that I sort of felt that tension when you made the decision, oh, I'm actually going to do Grace in the Wild. And you didn't
Yeah.
like decide that. You hadn't planned that at all. And everything you just explained never would have happened unless you, and I'm sure that risk was just like terrifying. But look at the results of it. It's just beautiful story.
Yeah. It's been absolutely amazing. I can't tell you the number of conversations I end up having in Ubers or sitting next to people in airplanes that
Mm,
just become absolutely fabulous and amazing. I
mm,
never did that kind of thing before, and now
mm,
it just comes so natural. My next story that I wanted to tell was to talk about a little bit of the mental overhead that goes into living as a transgender person, particularly a transgender woman. So I'm listening to a podcast one day, and I'm listening to the commentator talk about how screens are, such a difficult, challenging thing for kids these days, and the way in which they may, um, really damage their future. And so I'm thinking, my two grandkids are upstairs sitting on their screens. I'm going to take them to the park. I want to give them some other different experience. So I had just moved into the neighborhood where I'm living right now. Some of the neighbors in the area knew that I was trans because they were friends with my son. I'm living with him. And so he let them know that I was coming, and the reception has been really amazing. But in this particular case, I decided, I've been there probably for a month or so, and I'm going to walk the two kids down to the park, and we get there maybe about 10 minutes to 5, and we're the only people in the park. And then another mom and her kid shows up, and another mom and her kid shows up, and within about 10 minutes, there's like 20 moms with young children all milling about the playground. And then these are kids, mostly kindergarten age kids. I came to find out later that This was a meetup group that had planned to meet in the park, and it was all for women who had kindergartners who were starting school. And so this was a chance for everybody to bond and get ready for the start of school. So I didn't know what to do. Ordinarily, I would, go around and I would talk to people, but I was feeling a little intimidated in that situation because, for one, it's South Carolina.
Mhm.
I don't know what the thinking is in this southern state. I do know that our legislature in January of this year was one of the last red states to pass, restrictions on gender affirming care and mandatory reporting for state employees, that if any child, wants to use a different name or pronouns, they have to be reported to their parents regardless of what the home situation is. So I don't know how far that extends into my community. And I also don't know what these moms are going to feel like having a trans woman in close proximity to their kindergartners. And so I was really nervous about, do I engage? Do I not engage? Then there was one other complication, and that was one of my neighbors from across the street who also had a child entering kindergarten happened to be at the park that day, and she knows that I'm trans. And so I wonder if she'll feel an obligation to tell all these other moms, that there's a trans woman here. So all of this is going through my mind while I'm at the park. And finally, I just had to catch my breath and say, you know what? I don't want to be a different person in this situation than I am anywhere else. I love kids. I have my grandkids at the park because I care about them. I'm having fun together. We're playing together. If, in a perfect world, it would be totally okay for me to play with all the other kids that are there. I can't take that liberty, but what I can do is I can start talking to the moms. And so that's what I did. And I met Kirsty, who is a global event planner for Oracle, and she's the one who called the meetup. And I met Kim and another Kim, and I met Becky, and I met a whole bunch of moms. And all of those conversations seemed to go really well and really smooth. And did they know I was trans? I don't know. They never gave any indication at all. But what was really cool was that after I kind of made my rounds and was just sitting on the bench with Gabriel, my 2.5-year-old, and that a couple of the moms actually came up to re-engage the conversation. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's amazing. And I went home that day feeling like, wow, just showing up as myself, caring for people, being curious, all of the things that I have learned to do. It works in every situation. And so it was like this little moment of victory saying, okay, yes, there's a lot of pressure out there. I don't really know how people are going to think or respond or react to me, but for sure I'll never know if I don't engage with them.
Mm.
So I just wanted to tell that story as a way of kind of helping to recognize that there is a little bit of emotional overhead that you kind of walk around with most moments of every day. Maybe it'll get better after I have been at this a little longer. I've only been living completely as Grace for 6 months now. And honestly, sometimes I forget that I haven't always lived this way. And so
Mm.
that's a really wonderful experience as well. The last story I wanted to talk about is I wanted to talk about gender and how I've kind of experienced gender at 3 levels. There's like my internal sense of gender, there's a cultural sense of gender, and then there's a physical sense of gender. And each one of them kind of plays out in different ways. At my core level internally, I just think of myself as a girl. I don't know how to put that into words any other way than that. That's just who I see myself to be, how I feel, and so that's what I am. Then there happens to be this whole cultural thing about, okay, you're a girl. well, now what are the expectations? How do you show up as a girl? And I have to tell you this story, and please, ladies, don't. I I had to repair. I got to repair. I wanted to repair my wife's car. The alternator went out on it, and so
I love it.
I've done car repairs all of my life, and so I got my jeans on and my shirt, and I did my very best to look as female as I could. And I walked into the auto parts store, and I do not know what came over me. It's like all of a sudden, I kind of turned into a different person. It's like I acted like I didn't know what I was doing. Like, please help me figure this out. And and get me the right alternator, and are you sure this is the right one? And and then I went home and proceeded to put it in, no problem. And then went back and said, oh, I'm so proud of myself. I was able to do this. It's like it was never any doubt in my mind that I was
Hmm.
able to do it. But somehow or other, I had developed this sense that that's how a female would act in an auto parts store.
Hmm.
Where did I get that? Well, that's when, well, and actually I didn't even notice I did it until about, I'm driving away, and about a mile down the road, I start to replay the experience in my mind, and I go, what in the world did I just do?
Hmm.
Why would I come across that way?
Mhm.
And then I started realizing, I've been socialized as a man my whole life. My only experience of what it means to be a woman is through the lens of a guy.
Hmm.
I've never had any close female friends other than my wife. Thank goodness for the last 3 years. I have so many amazing female friends who have been willing to invite me into their lives and kind of help me navigate this. But prior to that, all I had was my outside perception of what it looks like or means to be female in this culture. And so I'm sure I made some pretty big faux pas. And if you kind of think about it, it's almost like a girl being raised by wolves and then being brought back into society and trying to figure out, how do we do this? That's
Right.
in some ways how it feels. And so I've had to just own the fact that I'm only 3 years old. And technically I'm only 6 months old when it comes to really engaging in the world as a woman. And so I'm trying to give myself grace, and would encourage all of you as well to give transgender people grace. Grace to the fact that maybe I could be looked at more like the 1-year-old who's learning to walk, rather than the 68-year-old who should really know what she's doing and doesn't necessarily. And think about how we do that. When a child is learning to walk, what do? We celebrate even the slightest thing that looks like a step. I mean, it can just be a half of a stumble. Oh, you did it. That's so amazing. And when the child falls, what do we say? Oh, you can do it. Yeah, you're wonderful. You can do it. And so I like to try to remind people that when someone is trying to live into their identity as a trans person, that's an entirely remaking of your life.
Hmm.
And it's really helpful to have a lot of grace when it comes to just letting people figure it out.
Hmm.
And then the last thing that I wanted to mention about gender is that there is a physical component to it. And so I have to spend kind of a lot of time trying to figure out, how do I present myself physically as a trans woman? What do I do with hair? It's like, I remember the first time I sat outdoors with my hair down,
Hmm.
and tried to have a meal, and the wind blew,
Hmm.
and I didn't have a hair tie with me. Who knew you were supposed to have a hair tie with you? Well, I didn't. And then there's things I can't do anything about.
Hmm.
It's like there are male characteristics that go along with being a trans woman, and angular jaws, and brow ridges, and extra length between the nose and the lip, which in women is shorter, which causes the lips to turn up a little bit, so it gives that fuller look of fuller lips. And all of that I have to simulate as best I can in order to be present in the world in a way that gives me a shot. And this, again, this is just me. Not every trans person, not every trans woman
Hmm.
decides that this is important, but it has been something that's been important for me. And
Yeah.
so kind of living every day with recognizing the physical limitations of trying to live this life, and wanting as best I can to at least get a foot in the door with people
Mhm.
before they make decisions about me without knowing me. So those are my stories. I have a million of them, but
I
I thought
love
those three might be helpful.
I love that too, and I love your gosh, you just put a microscope on three little stories that just say so much. Thank you, Grace. That was
Yeah.
great. We're gonna, well, I'm sure we'll get your voice on a few questions on the back end, but I'm gonna introduce my good buddy Lucas. Now, Lucas, we met at, I think, the Reformation Project conference last October, right? And I didn't know you. I don't know how it's possible that I didn't know you up to that point. And some lady wanted to take me out to lunch, and you came along, and you, as you'll all learn shortly, this kid has a bunch of wonderful energy.
Mhm.
And you just like, I loved your but like good energy. Like I love your story, and I love your focus, and I love your passion to not just be yourself, but make the world a better place. So we'd love to hear from you now.
Thank you, Brian. It's really good to be here, everyone. So, I'll just cut right into it. I I'm 37 and I've been transitioning for 10 years now. I knew that I was trans. Try not to get distracted by all the comments coming in. So I started transitioning when I was sorry. Let me back up. I knew that I was trans when I was 12. Right when puberty hit, I kind of grew up as a tomboy. When puberty hit, the influx of hormones just threw everything off for me, and I didn't know anybody who was trans. So if you're 12 nowadays, there's a lot of trans kids, in your schools, but then there wasn't. And
Sure.
so um I was 12, and I didn't really feel confused. I mean, I did in a way. Like I was like, what's going on with my body? This doesn't make sense. My brain doesn't match my body. But at the same time, I felt confident that I was a boy.
Mhm.
And so I went by the name of James. And at the time we were living in Alaska, we had moved there for the summer. And I got to tell all my new neighborhood friends that my name was James. And it worked out great for about 3 months. And then they came to the house and asked for me. And my mom found out, and it was by then, so it was shut down, and I had to suppress that, which was very difficult.
Hmm.
Um, and then I went to a group home when I was 16 years old, a Christian group home for at-risk youth. I wanted to go there. I was just having a really difficult time, and they were very like homophobic, like you can't be gay, it's the worst sin in the world. And it's because at that point I was just living as a masculine female, presenting that way. um, and so I did my best to shove it down, to honor God with my life and with my thoughts. And I married a man when I was 19, trying to be this straight cisgender woman that I was clearly not.
That's right. I
And
forgot that. I forgot that you
we
were
were
married.
yeah, 4 years, and it wasn't
Wow.
all bad. No, it was actually really good, but just wasn't authentic. It wasn't honest,
Yeah.
and on both of our parts in that regard. I mean, I was always upfront with who I was, but I couldn't live as that person, and that's the difference.
Yeah.
And so he ended up stepping outside of the marriage, and while we were in the ministry, and so that led to a divorce. And up to that point, mind you, I mean, I'm the kid that was totally sold out for God in the bathroom reading my Bible for an hour in the middle of the night because I was so hungry for God. I would go in my closet and just worship. Um, And I prayed when I was 19. So, I mean, all throughout my teenage years, I had been prayed over, laying on of hands to deliver the homosexual spirit out of me, right? And
Yep.
it wasn't going anywhere, but I wasn't acting in it. And then when I was 19, I was like, okay, I've tried everything. The only thing left, in my opinion, was the fast. You know, that scripture that says, and this kind only comes out by prayer and fasting. So I started a 40-day fast of bread and water only. Well, guess what? I'm still gay. And so that was happening at 19, and I was really frustrated. And so I married this guy. When we got divorced, my whole world fell apart. Like, truly, we were in the ministry together, and I just thought, man, God, I've done it your way my whole life. I've been so loyal. To have everything fall through my hands was just
Yeah.
horrible. And so um at that point, at 24 years old or 23, I came out as gay that time because that's all I could connect with at the time. And it was about a year later that I was just home watching TV by myself. And God, I felt that still small voice like tugging at my heartstrings. And for a minute, I was ignoring it. I was like, God, I don't want to hear what you have to say. And I hadn't felt that in about a year. I shut my Bible, like walked away and everything. And so I went in my bedroom, finally gave in to the still small voice. I went in my room and I just got on my knees, just the posture of humility and openness. And I was like, okay, God, what do you have to say? And all I heard in my spirit was, you have to accept yourself. And it was not what I was expecting, you know? Um, and I just sat there and let that soak in for a while. And I was like, well, if God is telling me I must accept myself, then he must accept me. Like just as I am. I don't have to change anything. And so, and I just started weeping for the first time in a year
Hmm.
and feeling his presence. And so at that point, I went to, I found a Christian church. Didn't know that, I mean, a Christian church. I found a queer Christian church. And I just saw the presence of, like, I felt the presence of God. I saw couples worshiping. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, if God is here among us, how can he be against us?
Hmm.
And so that was a journey of about 4 years of me merging my sexual orientation and my faith. And then about at 26 years old, I was with a girl at the time, and I came to her crying saying, I feel like a guy inside, like I need to do something about this. Still, I had never met a trans person, didn't know what that was. And she shut me down pretty quick. Um, I did not have a backbone. I very much have one now. And so I
Yes,
just
you do.
lived. I very much do. And so I just shoved it down once again. It was never safe to come out and just be who I am.
Yep.
And then about a year later, I was done. I had been through years of therapy. I went through a lot of childhood trauma. And so I had a lot to work on in therapy. And everyone thought, well, that was my issue. They're just wounded from childhood. Well, yes, but also I was trans and I was struggling with gender dysphoria and having to live as a female in a society that didn't understand me. And
Mhm.
so at 27, I attempted suicide. I took a lot of medication that would have killed me, and I was unconscious. And the whole time as I was doing that, I told God, I'm also very bold. I said, God, you're either going to fix me and show me what it is that I need, or I'm out of here. We're not doing this anymore. And I had tried to kill myself quite a bit as a teenager as well. And so here I am. And so in the hospital for a couple days, unconscious, the doctors told my mom, your kid will probably be brain dead if they survive. And they tried to release me after a few days. I'm like, I'm just going to do it again. And so I put myself in treatment. I stayed with the pastor couple for a while. And I was so determined to find my healing, whatever it was, like the missing component, right? And
Yep.
nothing was really shifting for months. And then that was in May. And then in November of that year, I was just so desperately alone and hopeless, beyond hopeless, that I wrote a suicide note and I put it in my pocket. And that day or the next, I was going to run my car into a tree at 100 miles an hour and kill myself. And I wanted my mom to know why. That was the purpose of the note. And the grace of God. That day, I had a doctor's appointment with my gender clinic, or my LGBT clinic, because I was living as lesbian at the time. And there was a trans guy that checked me in, and I don't even think I put the two and two together like consciously that he was trans, but I just knew that I needed to talk to him. And I asked him if we could have a conversation, and he said yes. And so we met up that weekend, and he shared his story with me. And it's like every light in the room came on. I finally understood what I had been feeling my whole life. And there was a name for it. It was being transgender. I was like, oh. And so I gave myself a week to pray about it. I didn't want to do what I did when I came out as gay. I didn't want to walk away from my faith and think that God didn't love me or accept me, approve. And so, but I knew, like, the truth had already been spoken. And so I gave it a week. I sat on it. I prayed, and then I went to a worship service that weekend with one intention, and that was to seek God on who I was. Like, is he going to be okay with this? And I just said, God, who am I? And I had started identifying with the name Lucas for a while at that point, and all I heard in my spirit was Lucas. And it's like 1,000 pounds came off my shoulders, and I could breathe for the first time in 27 years. And I had peace and I had confidence. And I started introducing myself as Lucas from that point on. And everything, I mean, trust me, things have been hard, but in a way, it's gotten so much easier. And I've learned to love myself. I was full of self-hatred. I was full of anger, just despair, hopelessness, just all the things. And I've been able to face my trauma now too, because I can face the world. There were so many things that I couldn't even deal with, and I couldn't even come to terms with because I couldn't even live in my own skin. I had so much self-hatred and like disconnection from self. And now that like all my parts are integrating, I'm able to deal with my trauma head on, the worst parts of my trauma. And that is a gift. And I was diagnosed with a couple different things as a teenager growing up. I was very out of control. And I was put on a lot of medication. Well, I took myself off medication 2 years into my transition. I've been off all medication since then. I am level. I'm stable. The testosterone has significantly leveled me out. I think I was having significant hormonal imbalances. So there's been like healing and correct medication. Like all of it it's a combination of why I'm well now. And it's 10 years in. And so that's kind of the gist of my trans journey. As far as like where the faith aspect is, I mean, y'all have heard my story about merging my faith and my gender and having that personal encounter with God. But the way that has also evolved in the last 10 years is, although I knew that I was okay with God, I also felt disqualified to like serve God.
Yeah.
I was told when I was 17, when I was in this group home by the CEO of the group home, that she believed that if I never went back to homosexuality, that I would open the eyes of a blind child one day. And that was not encouraging, because my anointing or my gifting in God, my spiritual gifts, were limited by whether or not I ever was gay again. And I always felt gay at my core. And so it was really hard, and everybody was just putting all these limits on me. I was kicked out of my Bible college at 20 years old, or I went back when I was 27 to try to finish my associates in biblical studies, and they would not let me come back unless I signed a letter repenting and reversing my transition. And I'm like, this is literally the thing that's kept me alive. I'm not doing that. And so I feel like there's just a lot of ignorance around what being trans is, and the stigma and the misinformation of like, well, God only creates male and female. He by choosing another gender, you're defying God. And here's what I have to say to those two things. One, yes, the Bible in Genesis talks about God made man and God made woman, but he also made intersex people. And a lot of people don't know what intersex is. Intersex is, the older term hermaphrodite. It's when you're born with some kind of ambiguous genitalia. There are over 36 different variations of being intersex. And 1.7 of the human population is intersex, which is equivalent to the amount of redheads. And that can show up from reproductive mixes to chromosomal to hormonal. And I'm like, so if God made this in between gender, right? Because they don't fit in the male or female category, but that's not in the Bible. Like, this is all, we are still God's creation. And so I feel like there's a lot of gray sometimes in life, and we don't have all the answers. And there are in betweens, and there's just not a hard and fast rule for everything. And I feel like people have lifted the Bible up almost as an idol, beyond a relationship, beyond what God says. Like, the Holy Spirit leads us into all truth. That is what the Bible says.
Preach.
Love your neighbor, love your neighbor, do not judge. Nowhere in the Bible does it tell us that we can't transition or we need to judge people. It's actually the opposite. Love each other. That is how people will know that you're my disciples. And I feel like the church has gotten so off base with being stuck on gender and sexuality.
Yeah.
And what I want to say about the other thing, what I was saying about gender, you know, if God made you a woman, then you're defying God. God, for one, God looks at the heart, not the part.
Mhm.
So this is how I look at it, y'all. This is my perspective. God talks about, you know, he looked at King David, he looked at his heart, and King David committed adultery and murder and all the things, right? In my opinion, worse than being trans. But he was still considered a man after God's own heart, right? And we can't begin to understand what David's heart looked like because all we saw was his actions,
Mhm.
but God saw his heart. And my pastor says a quote that I love. She says, "Love knows the whole story."
Mhm.
And we just have to be really careful about casting judgment about things, especially we don't know about. And when people are killing themselves because they're trans or gay and they're not accepted, they're being kicked out of their homes by their Christian families. I mean, we need to stop dead in our tracks and pay attention. Because in my life and in so many people's life, the fruit speaks. The fact that I'm no longer suicidal, the fact that I'm
Yes.
stable, the fact that I'm happy and healthy and whole and want to live my life. And my whole life is dedicated to helping people and wanting people to overcome their own pain and hurt, whether they're trans or not. And that is good. That is good works.
Mhm.
Um, and so I believe that God supports me in my transition. I believe that He backs me 100%. I honestly believe that, and I know that God is going to judge me according to my heart, not whether I transition. And here's the thing, because I transitioned, I'm able to live for God more fully. I'm able to step into my identity. I have confidence, like Grace was saying, she has got newfound confidence that she didn't have before. And those are the things, like we have good fruit that is being produced from our lives. And I still hold God. God is my standard. I still live my life according to his will for me and
Mhm.
according to his standard. And you can ask anybody that knows me and they'll tell you that.
Mhm.
Um, so my love for God hasn't changed. My love for self has grown because I'm no longer rejecting myself. And here's the thing. We can't fully love God or anyone else if we're rejecting who we are. If we're rejecting and casting away and feeling shame about who God created us to be, how can we truly know God, love our neighbor, know our neighbor, if we're bound up in this shame and
Mhm.
fear? And that's what a lot of it is. And so I have been set free.
Mhm.
And it's a gift. Life is a gift. I used to think life was a curse. I did.
Mhm.
And now I wake up wanting to make a difference, wanting to thankful that I can finally be Lucas and help people navigate this world. My own father told me that being trans was a mental illness, and that's why I can basically no longer, like, he doesn't want anything to do with me. And I'm like, well, for one, since when do we like kick people out of our family because they have a mental illness? But two, because that's very unloving. But two, I'm like, actually, my life shows the opposite.
Mhm.
Becoming Lucas has helped me with all my quote mental illnesses.
Mhm.
And so I think these are the kinds of things that we need to pay attention to,
Yep.
and ask ourselves, what fruit are we producing by being gatekeepers of the kingdom of God and of the church and of our families, and saying that we understand fully about a topic that really even science doesn't understand. But we need
Mhm.
to hear from more trans people to hear their stories and their journeys and like, what is gender dysphoria? When did it start for you? How has that experience been? And I just think that one by one, we'll start to open our minds and our hearts, and we'll start to understand people and love people more. And we'll get knocked off our pedestal because we all sit on one to some extent, right?
Mhm.
Um, but transitioning has made me more humble and just more compassionate. Even people that struggle with like the worst things in the world, I'm like, that's coming from a place of woundedness. And there's a reason for that. And
Mhm.
everybody deserves love and compassion. And it's the kindness of the Lord that leads us to repentance, not the judgment of Christians.
Mhm.
So I would say that is kind of the gist of my story. And I don't want to get on another preachy soapbox.
Oh my
Um,
gosh. I think
but
I could listen to you. I probably would go to church more if people preach like that. So that's some good stuff. I love your yeah, just really good. The piece about um the piece about how we can't love God if we don't if we're not at peace with ourselves, you know. That's just such a huge thing. And being measured by your fruit. you know, which is good. And I love, it's so cool because like you really do have a confidence, but your confidence so clearly comes from your relationship with God. You know what I mean? It's a really cool balance and it's a cool thing to see. And you just like blow up, both of you like blow up stereotypes as soon as you open your mouths. It's just beautiful. Yeah, it's really good stuff. All right, we're gonna thank you for sharing your stories. And I remember when the three of us were planning this, we had like all these subjects and questions we could have gone after. But I really just wanted to just hear how you would just talk about your stories and your perspectives and stuff. So thanks a lot for that. Thanks for letting us into that. That's great. We have some I'm going to put you on the spot, Kelly. I've got a couple of good pre-submitted questions. Should I start with those, or do you have one in the chat that you're seeing that you really want to serve up first?
I have one good question from the chat. It came in fairly early. It says, as a former pastor of an evangelical Christian church, how has your faith been impacted by your journey? I think Lucas spoke to that. If you want to jump in that, or Grace, I think, that's something that you didn't quite touch on. So that might be a good place for you to jump in here too.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, I would say that my faith is stronger and deeper than it's ever been at any point in my life. I have a very simple faith these days. It's not a faith in, a doctrine or a creed or a set of concepts or ideas, but it's faith in a person. I absolutely believe in the unconditional love that God has for me. And being able to relax into that, to know that, to know that I'm celebrated by God, and enables me to feel like living as grace actually is fulfilling the way that God created me in ways that it was never possible to before. I think that I'm living my Christian life pretty much the way the early church must have had to live theirs.
Mm.
You all know that there was no Bible for the first 30 years of the church's existence. They had just been told that the Old Testament is fulfilled and that Jesus is now the pattern and guide for our lives. And so Jesus left his church with a very simple command to follow. There's only one of them, and that was love one another as I have loved you. And I find myself every day asking that question. How can I love my neighbor better? How can I love my kids better? How can I learn to love better? And how can I demonstrate this unconditional love that God has for me to the people that I come across every day? I tell you what, just asking that question alone gives me so much to think about when I look at the individual people around me. And I would say one other thing, or maybe two other things. I can't believe that as a pastor for 32 years, that I spent so little time in the Gospels. I spent most of my time in the epistles. I loved the epistles. They told you all the stuff you were supposed to do. And I didn't spend enough time looking at what Jesus actually did and the way in which that he didn't spend a lot of time talking to people about what was wrong or what needed to be changed or how to fix them. He just showed up and essentially said, what do you need? And he gave it to them. And I realized that love doesn't get to be me defining what love looks like for you. Love gets to be you defining what love looks like to you. And I can decide, am I going to love you or am I not going to love you? And God is helping me make that decision every day to figure out how I love you so that you walk away feeling like you matter, you're special. I think that's what happens anytime someone has an encounter with God. And so I hope that's what's happening when they have encounters with me. That's my faith today.
I love that. Lucas,
And
what are your thoughts on
yeah,
that question?
I just want to add, I've talked about it mostly, but we all do this, but we're constantly evolving and changing our minds about things, and that's okay. And I think a lot of people are afraid to entertain changing their mind about homosexuality or about the transgender issue because they're gonna like fall away from the truth, or the enemy's gonna creep in. And for one, that's fear based, I feel like. But two, if you look throughout history, we've changed our position on women serving in the church. Or at least some people have. Some people are back in 1840, but where women serving in the church, like my first, because I felt called to preach when I was 17, and that came directly from God. There was no doubt in my mind, and I challenged it, or I was like, huh, that's interesting. And so the male teacher in the school that day told me, well, God doesn't call women to preach because you can't speak over a man. I'm like, well, I know what I heard, so I'm going to the CEO's office right now, and I'm going to talk to her about it. And that's what I did. And so Sister Pam was the CEO of the group home at the time, and she was a preacher. And she sat down with me, and we looked at the scripture in First Corinthians where it talks about women should be quiet in church and never speak over man or never teach men. And so for the first time, I looked at the Bible through a different lens, through understanding the context and the culture and what was going on. But so many people don't do that. And I feel like that's the way it was with slavery and women in the church and all these other topics that has evolved over time. And even growing up, I was taught that my baptism was not valid because it wasn't Church of Christ. And my dad was Church of Christ and my mom was Baptist. I'm like, well, I guess I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't. But and so I just feel like we have to be very mindful of being willing to change our mind, like having a mind of clay and not a mind of concrete, because God is so much bigger than we understand him to be. The Bible, he's bigger than the Bible. And I'm in seminary right now, and things are shifting all around. But I think this is one way that we can grow our faith and we can still be faithful at the same time. But this is what it's going to take.
Yeah. No, I love that. That's really, really good. Okay, I got another question that came in more from a personal standpoint. And maybe I'll put this one to you first, Grace. This person was curious at what you both do for work and how people treat you at your jobs. And also, how is it transitioning at your jobs and at your churches? So what are your experiences, kind of everyday life within your jobs and your churches today and or when you were transitioning?
So I'm mostly retired. And so far, the federal government is still willing to send a Social Security check, even though I'm trans. But I do work. After I was no longer in ministry, I started doing accounting work for churches. And for the longest time, I worked with Assemblies of God churches, which, if you know anything about the Assemblies of God, you know that they're one of the really diehard fundamentalists. They're digging in their heels, right and left on this topic.
Sure.
And so I still continue to work for the organization that serviced those churches. I have only one church left, and they don't know that I'm trans. I'm not yet ready to give up that income. And so I have decided not to have that conversation with them yet. I had a meeting with them earlier today, and it's the one time a month where I don't get to show up as Grace. I have to go back to Greg. And I anticipate that that's going to last for about another, maybe a year at the most, because the IRS is eventually going to send both my employer and the church a notice that the information that they issued my 1099 under is no longer correct. And we'll have that conversation at that time. If, I have this naive sort of belief that my work may stand for itself and they might allow me to continue. I'm also aware that there are other individuals like me with similar stories for whom the moment it became known that they were trans, it was that they had became a different person and none of the past mattered. So I'm prepared for either conversation. I just don't want to have it just yet.
Wow. I've just continually struck in this call about how you have to deal with things that I don't even think about. Both of you, just for the record. Lucas, how about your answer to that? Maybe, and specifically, like, where where are there challenges for you in your church and work settings that you're still trying to have to navigate that are tough?
Yeah, because like my job right now, I work at a children's crisis respite center for kids, and it's very trans affirming. But throughout the last 10 years, I've worked places that were not affirming, or were just really ignorant and got major HR nightmares.
Mm.
One time I had a manager when this was like my first year of my transition, so my voice I still sounded like a girl or whatever, and he kept calling me names, and when I reported it, I heard him tell the head manager, well, I looks like a guy walking towards me, but sounds like a girl, so I'm just gonna call it a girl. And I was like, I'm about to throw hands right now. No, but it just was very stuff like that. I've been confronted in the office of, well, were you born? Like, what was your name when you were born? Like, is that really your name? Like trying to get to that point. I'm like, yeah, my name's Lucas. It's none of your business.
Mhm.
And they're like, well, like, but but weren't you like born like not a boy? And so these are very inappropriate things that happen. I won't even get into my dating life, but so we're gonna keep this G-rated. But as far as questions that are very off color, but um but yeah, and then in church, like I only go to affirming churches now, but
Okay.
throughout time, there's been issues with that. I had one pastor tell me that first of all, he's like 10 years younger than me, and I'm not trying to like be like that, but at the same time, I'm like, dude, I've lived a life, okay? But he was telling me how he, just like with his 4-year-old son, he was equating me to his 4-year-old son, by the way. I know more words than that. He was telling me that he knows what's best for me, just like he knows what's best for his 4-year-old son. And what's best for me is to reverse my transition and go back to the way that I was. I'm like, first of all, I've had surgery, so that's not happening. Second of all, I would rather live and not die, so we're not going to do that. But it was so ignorant in the most pure definition of the word ignorant that he truly felt like he knew what was best for me. But that's coming from like he just has no clue, like genuinely has no clue. And
Mm.
I had just literally, it was a 3-hour conversation over coffee. I poured my heart out and told him my story. And I'm like, how can you still think it's what's best for me after everything I just told you?
Mm.
And that's the problem that we run into. You can't serve here. You can't you can't even come to church here. I've even heard pastors say that trans people should be killed. And I'm like, wow, that's very Christ-like. You win the Christ-like award for the year.
Mm.
So those are the kind of things. But seeking out affirming faith places is really key. But there's a lot of work to be done. And so
Right.
that is part of what I feel called to do, is go in and share my story and share my perspective with some of these places and people that are,
Yeah.
fairly closed-minded or are not really there yet.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's probably what we have in common too, is that for some crazy reason, I feel called to hang out in more conservative spaces.
Mhm.
And thankfully, I haven't experienced, I'm really the exception in that I've sort of experienced church growing up as it could be and should be. And so I don't come out of the church experience with a lot of hurt and wounds. I know that I'm very much the exception for LGBTQ plus folks, so it allows me to be a little bit safer in those spaces. So maybe we just have 3 minutes left, and I need to wrap it up at the end. So I'm going to close with a simple question to both of you, and it's kind of on the heels of where you just were. So maybe Lucas, you can go first. But when you think about being in those non-affirming spaces, right? And maybe not even like the most extreme non-affirming idiot spaces, but folks that are somewhere in the middle, trying to figure this stuff out. They're not sure how they think about trans, even about me as a married gay man. They're not hateful, but they're somewhere earlier on the curve there. How do you in your life, or even recommend us to like appeal and engage to more conservative, moderate folks in your church in your life in a way that's going to be productive?
Good question. So generally finding common ground, like what do we agree on? We
Yeah,
both love God, we both honor the Bible, we both, we have these shared values. I think that's huge, and sometimes that can create a bridge.
yeah,
Letting people know, like getting to know them, like if people just knew me and Grace
yeah.
before or after knowing that we were trans, I mean, how can you not love us, right? I mean, I think we're lovable.
Yeah.
But
Amen.
not to toot my own horn, but I mean, so I've been told. But so I just think relationship is really key, and like
Yes, yes.
authentically, and as people know you, like the empathy builds.
Yeah.
And it's going to be really hard to hate somebody you know
Yeah.
personally, and you've heard their heart. And then like letting them see your life lived out for Christ, whether you're an ally, whether you're a queer person, because your life speaks. And it's really hard to say you're of the devil or you're demonic, even though I've still been told that. When you live according to the Bible, like your life is pure, you know, I mean, as
Mhm.
pure as it can be, or you know what I'm saying? Not it's like we have to be perfect, but
The fruit of your life.
right, you're
Yeah.
living with honor to God and reverence. And that's kind of what I would say. And then just educating, like, do you actually know what it is to be trans? And like, I had somebody tell me, well, I'm against transitioning because we're allowing 4-year-olds to change their gender, like have bottom surgery, which is surgery below the belt. And I'm like, well, that's actually not what's happening. And so when I was able to educate them on what's actually happening in trans healthcare, I'm hopeful that it helped change their mind, which I will quickly throw in there that part of the resources is going to be a transgender healthcare panel that I put together.
Yes.
And it's incredibly in depth and comprehensive on all the things like healthcare related and mental health and different things, like even Olympic, like sports and stuff, trans people in sports. So check that out when you get the resources, and that'll answer a lot of things we were not able to today.
Yes, yes, definitely. How about
I
you?
would echo the same thing. I've never seen a good argument change anybody's mind, but I have seen connection get people asking questions about whether or not what they believe actually is life-giving. And if I can at least get them to the place where they can see me as a human being and they know that I care about them and love them, I feel like that's the best opportunity for them to start rethinking whether or not the theology makes room for folks like me.
Hmm, I would say it does. Thank you both so much for tonight. I feel like we talked about a lot, but we actually kind of stayed on time. That was really amazing. I think like time slowed down or something. Beautiful to have both of you. I'm honored to know you. Thank you for helping me inform my concerns and uncertainties with just relationship and getting to know you and finding the common ground that we clearly have. Thank you, everybody, for attending tonight. I love when nobody drops off. Y'all stuck around. No surprise. How can you not love these two? Call to action for you. We'll get you in the email in your inbox. We asked these two I mean, there's so many resources out there. So we asked these two, what should we feature for you all? And they gave us particular resources. So we'll give you Lucas and Grace's recommended sort of resources to look at, such as the panel that he was talking about. And then we'll let you know about Mark Wingfield in a couple of weeks and the rest of the season and that follow-up in you. But thank you, everybody. Love you
Thank
all.
you.
Have a great
Thank you
night.
all.
Good night.